Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Holy Happy Hour. I'm your host, Josh, and I wanted to first of all thank you guys that have all subscribed so far. But you guys that have not yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's the best way that you can support the channel. If you guys are looking for ways to continue to walk with us and grow in your faith, feel free to join our Patreon group as well. It's actually free to join. So I know every time everyone hears Patreon, they think, oh gosh, they're asking for money. But no, you don't. There are opportunities to support. You do not have to support to join. There are daily gospel reflections, saint reflections. We cover some of the stories about like the 21 Coptic martyrs and stuff like that. But it's my own writings that we're putting out there, and I do have some other people that may be joining that channel as well. But it's just a great way for me to start a conversation. Hopefully, you guys join along so we can all grow in our faith together. But join that group today. All the links are in the description. Today, we are actually welcoming back a guest that we've had on before, Caleb Harlan. How's it going?
Hey, good. It's good to be back.
Yeah.
A few
Yeah,
months. A
it's
lot
been
of
a little
life
bit. I've got a new
happened
setup.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off there. What'd you say?
I said a lot of life has happened between then and now.
Yeah.
Uh, a few ups and downs on in both of our worlds, but it's good to be
Yeah.
back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us again for this one, and especially with the topic we'll get into. But before that, like, how's Lent going? How's everything going in your life in that front?
Lent has been good this year. A bit more of a family focus. We're all trying to do a few things.
Mhm.
Lots of activities going on at the church that we're at, and we're participating in the Wednesday teachings and dinners and Stations of the Cross on Friday, and both trying to my wife and I add a few things in individually and also as a couple. So
Yeah,
we're
that's
we're
awesome.
we're getting there.
Yeah.
It's not been a perfect. I've struck out a few times. I have forgotten
Yeah.
to do my things.
Yeah, I feel like for Lent, for me, I'm always like pretty good until about day three, and then I'm like, oh dang, whoops,
Yeah,
I was
right.
not supposed to have this coffee or this alcohol drink, whatever it was. But this year, yeah, I feel like me and my wife have focused more on like things we're adding, and we obviously still pick something to fast from and everything. But in the past, I feel like I've really had stuff in my life where it's like I need to fast from this. Whether it's like 3 or 4 years ago, and I was just like wanting to watch TV all the time. I was like, I just need to fast from this. Like no
Sure.
television at all, and that was probably the hardest Lent I've ever had. But it really helped. And then I've had times where it's like alcohol maybe is the thing or sweets, and but this is the
Yeah.
first year where I not saying I'm perfect, but I had like multiple things where it's like I feel like I could fast from any of these, but I didn't know which one to give up, so I just kind of picked a couple. But yeah, but picking that things to add, I feel like people kind of forget about that side of Lent of like they maybe think of the things to fast from, but not think of the other two pillars of almsgiving and kind of in prayer and like adding stuff.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. Well, I'm glad Lent's going well. We're gonna be jumping into our series now. This has been a little bit less consecutive of a series, but it's been great. It's been awesome. I think you guys have been responding really well to, it, and you really like this series, which I'm really glad. But the seven vices and their opposing virtues. So, any of you guys are watching for the first time, this series was brought to my mind when I was rewatching some of the talks from Seek 24, I believe. But Father Josh Johnson did a talk, and it was a 1 hour talk on all of them. And I was rewatching it. I was like, this is amazing. I think you could do a whole series on one at a time. Like you could take one vice. Honestly, you could probably take one vice and do an episode, and then do the opposing virtues its own episode. But depending on how deep you wanted to go. But this series, we're going to continue with that. And so Caleb has graciously took on lust and chastity, which was awesome because I was not looking forward to like asking somebody, because everyone always jokes. It's like, did you ask me on here because you think I struggle with this? It's
Yeah.
like, no, not necessarily.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thanks for joining us for that. Did you want to start maybe? I was thinking like just kind of what is lust? I mean, we
Sure.
know, I think like everyone could give us a definition of it, but do kind of a more in depth kind of version of what is
Yeah.
lust.
Yeah. I appreciate. I was eager to talk about this topic. I
Mm-hmm.
both it's a big part of my life and story, and the ways I've seen God redeeming my heart and soul, and also it's just a really prevalent thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
society talks about it all the time. In some sense, our American society is aimed to make us lustful.
Yeah.
It's everywhere in all the things. The more I would talk about this, the more I'd sound like an old grandfather. But we're really aimed at even just the obsession in ways that social media makes us think about our own appearance and makes us kind of judge and think about and become drawn to someone else's appearance and want
Hmm.
what they look like. Or um, anyway, so we need to talk about it because the world talks about it,
Yeah.
we do as well. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. So what is lust? I would say Jesus defines it as the heart of adultery, when he's perfecting the law and bringing to light what's underneath the old covenant law. He narrows in on lust. That you've heard it said, "Do not commit adultery." I say, don't even look at someone with lustful intentions. And there we see that lust is wanting something in a disordered way. It's and take letting your mind and your heart go with someone in particular. If we're thinking, lust, you can lust after objects or things or food or jobs, hobbies, whatever, careers. But here we'll talk about like lust in the sexual way, lusting after another person sexually. And it's wanting something and thinking about and kind of going beyond with your heart and your mind something that does not belong to you and some in some disordered way. And I think where that leads us to actually begin the conversation is the Christian belief that there's like a structure and an order to our sexuality and to our person, to our body. Um, that if we're saying that lust is disordered desire or disordered affection, that there's actually an order. And the way I like to think about it is thinking about, let's just think about mountains or a sunset or something,
Hmm.
and then think about some beautiful artist who drew, professionally goes and draws some image of that sunrise or that mountaintop. And then you think about my child, my 4-year-old, drawing a picture of that picture. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, that there is a real thing, there's a real sunset, there's a real mountain, and that real thing, the ordered, is actually we're shown. It's kind of prefigured throughout the Old Testament, and it's finally revealed. And Paul says that this structure of marriage, the intimacy, the oneness that we were all designed for, is a oneness between Christ and His church. That we, as His bride, are willingly receiving Him, and that He is giving Himself fully to us. And that when that's happening, our hearts, our longings, our desires are met, and that is the oneness. That's the order of what what we're actually created for.
Hmm.
And the image of that order is what we see in the garden when God creates male and female, and the two shall become one flesh. And God creates them uniquely and to complement one another, and the man gives himself to the woman freely, and for her good and for her, he, as I forget who it, I think it was Pope John Paul II, defined it as willing the good of the other as this great act of love, and the woman is receiving him. She's not rejecting him. She's not covering herself or fleeing from him, but she's receiving him. He's sacrificially giving, and she's sacrificially receiving. And the two in that moment, both in body and in soul, are becoming one flesh. And this is an image of the real thing, which is Christ and His church, mysteriously. Um, and what we then all kind of play off of is actually the 4-year-old drawing of that, which is life after sin and the ways that you see sexuality distorted through the years and
Hmm.
generations, and living in this fallen curse.
Yeah.
It's in, living in this cursed fallen world, and where we're actually no longer willing the good of the other, but wanting the other for our own good, using the
Hmm.
other, objectifying the other, fantasizing about the other, you know, thinking about them in a way that's not actually, uh, you know, in anywhere modeled as Christ in the church, in anywhere modeled in male, female, Adam and Eve pre-fall.
Hmm.
but it's completely self-absorbed and wanting and wanting and wanting. And like society today, again, like says, like applauses that. It says, do
Hmm.
that. That's great. You should. Oh, they don't use these words, but you ought to use the other person for your own good.
Yeah.
Like it's a free world. Do what you want. Don't be strapped down by old ways and customs. But it leads to destruction, and it leads to
Hmm.
emptiness, and it leads to having to go back and chase after the next person or the next thing.
Hmm.
And it leaves you feeling guilty and ashamed and isolated and alone and dirty.
Yeah.
And anyway, so then Christ now is redeeming us back into this call, and he's doing that um, through his Spirit and through his church and um, through virtues and through all sorts of things, through his grace, bringing us back to ordered sexuality.
Hmm.
And it's a fight, and that's the fight that I think majority of us find ourselves in
Yeah.
this world is
Yeah.
coming back to the order and the goodness of what
Yeah.
sexuality is intended to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's something I was thinking about when you said that was the side of things that maybe aren't like necessarily on the sexual side, like using other people for your benefit and stuff. So, so that would be a form of lust as well. Like, so if I was like, man, I'm gonna be real good friends with Caleb because if I am, man, he may be able to get me a job somewhere or like whatever, like doing something only for my benefit. So that would be a form of lust as well.
I would say that I wouldn't. So that would be more just an example of objectification or using.
Hmm.
Um, that would not be love. That
Hmm.
would be I'm I want you for the benefit that's going to give to me.
Hmm.
Lust would be I I see who this person is and what and starting to obsess and fantasize over what how that would make me feel and how
Hmm.
that would increase my self-worth and in all the ways that it would begin to benefit me.
Hmm.
Um, that is, I would say that's the lust. So you think of
Hmm.
a career. I mean, again, like to expand beyond sexuality, you think of a career, and it's like I'm lusting after um, this, not because it's in any way the gifts and the desires that God's given me, and it's not
Hmm.
where I feel Him leading me or calling me into. It's not has nothing to do with that. It's not somewhere that I can feel like I can give of myself,
Yeah.
but purely because look at the identity and the status that it would give to me, and the wealth that it would give to me, and all the perks that this would bring me, and
Hmm.
to think about something like that purely for these selfish motives have nothing to do with the order that God's actually created us to live with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it truly is like what society is just teaching us is everything's about success and getting ahead or getting forward and doing whatever you have to do to get there and sometimes that's even the detriment of like a family. Like sometimes society is like work those 60-hour weeks for you men so that you can get those promotions and you can earn more money and like go on vacations. Or I have friends that travel for work and they travel for 3 weeks a month and then they're home only for a week and it's like but it's if you do that though you make more money and I feel like some of the what society teaches us and it just yeah it's kind of disordered. um, it affects us on all the stages of our life and I'm curious, maybe your thoughts on this is like I feel like out of all the vices we've done so far, which is all of them now. I think this is the last one. Um, lust seems like where the enemy is the most successful right now.
yeah,
And I know pride is the Father Castro started this whole thing off, and he talked to us about how pride's the root of all of them. But lust it seems like is where he is succeeding the most. And I don't know your thoughts of like if you agree with that, but also why that is like why is the enemy
yeah,
succeeding so much?
yeah. And I think that I would agree because lust then makes us. So if you think about particularly like the kind of hookup culture or even the
Yeah.
way that the taboo ways that we just like society dates one another like our dating world is infiltrated with lust like we're
Hmm.
actually it's so normal so
Yeah.
there's lots of lustful uh, tendencies and sins that we kind of accept societally but you think if you narrow it in on like just the rampant use of and addiction to pornography, for example,
Hmm.
which is nothing more than lust and objectification, and there's
Hmm.
all sorts of psychological components to this where it is so heavily addicted. But the recipe of pornography and the way that this has in the lust of pornography, the reason it's so rampant is because of the isolation that
Hmm.
it leads us into, and the shame that it causes us to experience, and that woe is me, I'm such a horrible person. I
Yeah.
always think of this as I've thought of this as the double-edged sword, where the temptation of the evil one luring us in, or the temptations of the flesh, is we think in that moment this isn't a big deal, and then the
Hmm.
moment we give in, we think to ourselves, this is the biggest deal in the world. I can't believe I just did this again.
Yeah.
So he lies to us, bringing us in, and then lies to us afterwards, making us feel like we are the only idiot who did this.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and that's a killer trap.
Yeah.
And the evil one thrives in the dark, and
Hmm.
when things are left under wraps, when you live unknown, um, the light of God's redemption can't breathe its graceful air into it, and you remain stuck.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a level of, particularly in like Christian societies, and particularly right now with women, it's a growing addiction and sin of pornography and lust in this way
Yeah.
that has so much shame associated with it that it's people stay in the dark because they think
Hmm.
they're the only one.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit more acceptance in Christian, almost borderline too much acceptance in my experience with college students and working with young adults in
Yeah.
the last 10 years. There's almost a little bit too much acceptance in the sense of, and what I mean by that is we all kind of nod along, like, yeah, there's a book called like Every Man's Battle, like you're not alone. And that's all wonderful.
Hmm.
But what I fear happens is that you find your intimate connection with other men over the shame that you experience and the sin that you struggle with. And
Hmm.
now the thing that's bonding you is not virtue, and it's not God and his redemption and his grace and his love, and it's not serving together and giving yourself to other. The thing that's bonding a lot of young men together is their shame,
Yeah.
and and then there becomes this weird, challenging reality of how do we speak into each other's life with love, and like, hey, I accept you, and like, I love you, and I'm sorry this is happening, and like, I also want better for you, and I want you to want better for me.
Hmm.
Anyway, so yeah, it's a weird. We're all kind of. This is all 15 years old, right? 20 years
Yep.
old. We're
Yeah.
we're all still working through it.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's part of it is that it is still relatively new. I've never actually really thought about that. Is that it's not necessarily this isn't a like pornography specifically, not a problem that dates back to like the 1800s, 1500s or something. It is new with technology. But something I was thinking about too with like the whole disorder of everything is as well as when it comes to the pornography side, it's just becoming more easily accessible. But then also for women, especially to get involved in it and using this as like this is an empowering thing, like an empowering you can make tons of money doing this, and yeah, and it's just so it's such a, I think that's where everybody's getting attacked the most, or that's like the most crucial place people are getting, or like women especially are getting attacked, is this ability to actually partake in it from the safety of your own home and doing it with people you want to do it with and stuff. And it's
Right.
just disordering everything. And yeah, and it's really, really interesting. And then on the other side, when we're talking about like the people partaking in it and the shame and the guilt and stuff, that was honestly my experience and something I've opened up with on this channel before of just having the guilt and shame. So I didn't want to tell anybody about it. So even still plugging into Bible studies and discipleship and stuff like that, I didn't want to bring it up because I was like, people kind of like respect me right now, and
Sure.
I'll probably lose that respect or or at least lose it for a while and have to build it back. And I really let the guilt and shame allow me to um, kind of hunker down on it or just bury it deep inside. And I think the enemy telling me as well, like you were saying, like he lies to you first of all, saying like it's not that big of a deal or whatever. You engage in it, then he lies to you and says it's the biggest deal in the world. And so now you're just like guilt driven. You just shove it down deep, and then yeah, it's just kind of this endless cycle. And I've always felt like since I kind of broke free of it and had this crazy Holy Spirit moment of just like feeling overwhelmed and felt like I had these directions from God saying, go to confession, tell Branson, guy I do discipleship with, and then tell your wife. Ever
Right.
since then, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I didn't even hesitate. I did it because I felt so driven to do it. I felt like everything was kind of put back in order. I had accountability. And I think the enemy was so angry because I didn't allow him to kind of like be with myself. Because then the other lie I think he was telling me during those times was like, you got this. You can overcome. You don't need to tell anybody. You can go to confession. You can overcome this by yourself. And I think I kept listening to that lie as well, and allowed it to kind of keep me in that cycle, keep me in the dark. And I kept failing on overcoming it. And I feel like he just kept encouraging me, like, no, you got this. You can overcome it by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to hit on both those things. Yeah, I've heard you mention that the women feeling empowered in this industry and I can't help but think this is just the curse playing itself out where,
Yeah.
in Genesis 3, the woman's desire is going to be in control of the man. And like,
Mm-hmm.
so now we're seeing women, well, wait, I can use my body and my tactics
Mm-hmm.
to control the heart of the man here.
Yeah.
Because it works. And, they have thousands of people being controlled by them. And
Mm-hmm.
you have the man who is extremely passive, who is seduced by someone taking the action. Oh wait, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to move towards a woman. She can just come towards me. That sounds wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's extremely empty because it's not ordered. It's not the way that God designed it to be. And so it's unfortunate that those things are playing itself out. But like that's been how that's how humanity's played itself out in a variety of just in
Yeah.
different ways. The second thing is like, yeah, I think that's one of the lies too. Is like, lust is it's it's an individual. We kind of think there was so much more on the line, perhaps. Like, if you think
Mm-hmm.
back to the Proverbs 7 reference, I think it's Proverbs 7 or Proverbs 9, the man who's allured by the woman, the
Mm-hmm.
seductress woman, and goes in to lay with her, and it says like he's like a bird caught in a trap, and he's his soul will go down into Sheol. You think back to like what all the actions you had to do to like get your lust met. There was so
Mm-hmm.
much on the line. It's like, okay, I've got to like pay this person. We've got to like actually do the thing, and there's all sorts of risk for health reasons for me and for her, and maybe we're going to have a child. And now it's like, oh, it feels so harmless.
Mm-hmm.
My
Yeah.
lust can be met in a way that's not going to hurt anybody. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is like you're crushing your soul,
Yeah.
and you're putting off the good for one further day, and you're destroying um, your own sexuality and
Mm-hmm.
your own urge and your own the goodness like that God wants you to use and giving yourself to other. You're totally perverting that and flipping it on its head.
Mm-hmm.
And more than anything, like God wants union with you, and
Mm-hmm.
He wants you to find Him beautiful, and He wants you to find His daughter that you're using as beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And you're as we lust, we're rejecting both of those things, and we're
Mm-hmm.
sinning against God, and
Mm-hmm.
and that has consequence. Actually, that causes death. And
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
the whole concept behind the crucifixion.
Yeah.
The but anyway, like the thought of doing this all by yourself is such a lie because
Mm-hmm.
we're created for a relationship to others. We cannot get out of this by ourselves.
Yeah.
And I know we'll talk maybe more about that later when we talk about maybe steps to get out, but that's going to be leading the charge there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I feel like too with lust and a lot of times lust, obviously pornography also it comes up, but even though there's lust outside of that, just that being kind of maybe the most common, I would assume. I feel like there's like a stumbling block too that like lust can like lead you down a path that um, you just kind of you engage with pornography, and if you do it consistently, it becomes so natural or so normal that what you're seeking after, and it also distorts like the actual um, like what sex actually is, because it's like
Right.
pornography is not realistic
Right.
sex, and so it distorts that. So then the real stuff's not satisfying you because your mind's distorted, and so then you seek out other things to fulfill that, whether it's like sex outside of marriage, or if, like adultery, or if it's engaging in pornography that's maybe a little bit more crazier than just the regular stuff, or whatever. I feel like there's this kind of like road you can head down to where it turns into a deeper, darker issue. And something I've always enjoyed watching, and I try not to watch too much of them because I think it can really take away. But are these people that do these YouTube channels where they catch child predators online, like they're trying to engage with
Yeah.
children, and I love that they're out there doing that. So cool. But part of me thinks like, how do these people get to this point where they're
Right.
at that point? And I imagine that it started way back in the day with
Right.
something of this sort. Whether obviously some of them start out of abuse, but I feel like that is somewhere where like if someone's engaging in pornography enough and they don't see it as a problem, then they're continually growing and seeing that like I'm searching for more and I'm seeking like this isn't enough now. I want to like check out something that's a little bit more out there, like a little bit crazier, and then it just gets to a point where it's like now you're doing something really bad.
Yeah. And one addition to that would be even in marriage, you
Mm-hmm.
can lust after and use. I mean, if you
Yeah.
have been trained and discipled in this lustful, pornographic objectification
Mm-hmm.
version of sexuality, then you can bring that into your marriage, and those are the expectations you have, and you
Yeah.
begin to actually lust after your spouse and to use her,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of to give and to, you know, create and cultivate this emotional and spiritual and physical oneness, you can make it just physical, and that
Mm-hmm.
actually leaves you empty and makes you feel like, man, I was missing out on something. It's like, yeah, God
Mm-hmm.
created this for so much more.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of harm that gets brought into marriages, and people don't think about it.
Yeah.
They are scrolling and scrolling, and I've never entered into social media world because I know I'll just scroll and scroll and scroll,
Yeah.
um, and then they're like, without even thinking about it, I'm sure they're beginning to compare, and then
Mm-hmm.
the wife is scrolling and scrolling, and she's comparing,
Yeah.
and so women can lust in this way too, of like, oh, I wish I
Mm-hmm.
looked like her. My life would be better if I looked like her. My
Yeah.
husband would love me more if I looked like her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, man, it's a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talked about that in an episode we just did. It came out this past Tuesday, and or I guess we're recording on a Wednesday. It came out yesterday. Um, and when we were talking about this guy's a filmmaker and does stuff, and he loves to be on social media, loves to do stuff for social media, but he talked about how like you can't get to that point until you understand the dangers of social media, and um, and how even something simple like that, where it's like using Facebook and Instagram. This is honestly was I was trying to figure out what were the triggers for me back in the day that caused me to want to do that. And I found that it was typically when I was doom scrolling on social media, because
Yeah.
yeah, you would see someone doing some kind of dance or something, or something that was just like like would catch you off guard because it's just like in the algorithm or whatever, and that would trigger your mind to do it. It's not something for me. Yeah, I've had to get rid of. I have them obviously for the show, but I don't hardly ever use social media at all. So anyone that DMs me, like I don't usually respond for a while. But I have found, yeah, that doom scrolling and stuff, and the comparison too. That's definitely a huge thing in today's world of everyone wanting to be like this person or look like that person or want my life to look like this couple's life, and stuff. But forgetting that social media is really just everybody's best. Like no one's gonna post like me and my wife just got in a
Sure.
big fight, happy Wednesday or whatever. Um, but
Yeah.
we're comparing ourselves to something again that's also not realistic. Like
Yeah.
pornography and stuff's not realistic. Social media is also not realistic as well because everyone is posting the highlights of their life.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about that word trigger that you
Yeah,
mentioned.
yeah.
And so there's a book, I think I mentioned this to you before. I recommend everybody to read it. It's he is a sex therapist essentially
Mm-hmm.
in Seattle, and he worked with Google to do the largest study of pornography use that's ever been done.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Jay Stringer, and the book
Mm-hmm.
is called Unwanted. And I maybe want to riff on this book for a few minutes. I would
Yes.
say, it's definitely the most influential book in my life, and it's the book
Yeah.
that I would give everyone if anyone wants a recommendation. This is the book I'm going to give you.
Yeah.
Um,
And we'll put the link in the description to like
okay, yeah,
buy it on Amazon or something.
we actually did an interview of him during COVID, the COVID year, when everyone was scrambling to figure out what sort of ministry you can do now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the book is split up into three parts. The first part is why am I here, or how did I get here, and it talks about upbringing and relationship to your mother and father. And he did this crazy study that essentially he could, with about an 85% accuracy, could say, hey, based on the type of pornography that you're watching,
Mm-hmm.
here's how your relationship was with your mom and dad, particularly
Oh,
with your mom.
interesting.
And so that's the first part. And it's like, and it talks about abuse and the challenges that brings in. And the second part is, why do I stay here? And it talks in this section about the 6 different triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's one of them that you mentioned, which is disassociation. So
Yeah.
an example here would be, it's 8 o'clock at night, and I'm played. I'm a college guy. I'm 18 years old. I've just played 4 hours of Xbox, and I've disassociated from real life. And next thing you know, I quickly turn over to my laptop, and I go and I lust, and I look at pornography, and now I come back. Like I've escaped into a world without even thinking about it, and I'm now in another reality, and I come back. So we live kind of in this disassociated world. One of the triggers that I think is a huge part of all this that no one talks about is that he talks about in length is futility. That, and particularly with college students, that they live in this 4 year weird period of life where they have kind of a purpose, like lowercase p purpose, and that's to learn, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
to study and to prepare for, begin to identify what I'm good at and what I want to do, and begin my work as a career or in a career. And you're growing and you're building and you're learning how to be in a relationship with God and with others, and you're learning how to be an adult and all these things. So you have this purpose, but it's baked with such futility, where it's,
Mm-hmm.
gosh, like another test, another 5 hour long study time. Can I get a break? And it's like, and then everyone's like, then you find out you're not invited over to someone's house, or someone's movie night, or
Yeah.
whatever that might be. And you have this futility that's baked in, like, where is my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the main, I would say, what I see is that, and Jay Stringer says that these triggers kind of domino into each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so he identifies, he plays out this scenario where you have this futile day and nothing went right, and like, I hated my job or whatever, and then you get into a fight with your spouse or with a friend, and now you're angry, and then you find out you don't get invited over into someone's party, and you're tired, and then, like, you go and you play Xbox. Like, that is going to lead you to pornography and lust every time.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
and so you've got to back out and identify, what are my triggers, that I don't just end up Tuesday nights at 11 p.m. looking at porn every week for no reason. Like
Hmm.
there's something that's happening in my life that
Yeah.
brings me back to that place. Like to not, and so his whole premise is like you must be curious about your lust. You can't just like turn your eyes and he uses the analogy of like someone breaks into your house every week and you open the door for them. You ought to like greet them at the door and say, "Why are you here? Like, what
Yeah.
makes you think you can trespass into my home?
Hmm.
Who are you? Where'd you come from?"
Yeah.
And we don't. We just want to. We kind of get lust takes a wrap and a hold of our life. We give in, and then we're like, "Dang it, I'm an idiot," and now we're full of shame. And then
Hmm.
2 days later, we're like, "Who would want to love such an idiot? Oh, that pretend girl would." And we go right back into it. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh man, I did it again. And we don't pause and back up and say, okay, what's bringing me to this?
Yeah.
What's my heart actually wanting? Um, anyway, and the third section of his book is how to get out of here. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, the trigger part really, we can think of it as just like, la la da da da. I was going along my day, and there goes a pretty girl. Oh, now I'm lusting, and now I'm going to go to my room, and I'm gonna look at pornography. It's like no, there's a lot more sequence that goes in. There's a lot more happening.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
I've heard something similar, and maybe from the same person. I don't know. It sounds very similar, but is people saying to avoid, or to it's like to halt or like to avoid whatever they use the acronym HALT, and it's like to avoid the occasions when you're hungry, alone, no, hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Like
yeah,
those are
yeah,
four of the times
four. That's
where
right.
you're going to, and maybe that's like those are kind of the scenarios, and then that's when those triggers can happen the most.
Yeah,
Because for my wife, it's hungry. Like it sounds so weird to say, but she really does have this kind of what is a hyperglycemic whatever. So when she does get hungry, she actually does have to really focus, and because she can lash out and get not pornography, but like lash
yeah,
out in anger or whatever. That's when she can lash out in sin. And then for me, it's more of like the lonely. Tired is another one when I used to be when I stayed up way too late. Like that's when I found
yeah.
myself engaging in it. When it was like midnight or later, stuff like that. But yeah, those four sounded very similar to what you were just saying.
And, and one of the things that he talks about where lust actually, we think of it only in the category of lust, but he actually would say that a lot of our lust is actually anger and control. So we're going to pornography, and based on the type of pornography that someone might be looking at,
Mm-hmm.
they're in control of the situation,
Yeah.
and or the unfortunate reality when you do a pornography research and
Mm-hmm.
you do this huge study, the unfortunate reality that he found was that the most common type of pornography is extremely violent and extremely
Mm-hmm.
aggressive, and it's angry men who are wanting to use this fantasy world to get their anger out.
Yeah.
And it's but we think of it only in terms of lust, and it's like, oh, there is lust, yes, but you've got some anger things to work through, and you've got to let go of some of this control. Like you're finding a false control in this 20-minute habit,
Yeah.
um, and you've got to get some control in your life. Like
Yeah.
you've got to what are some good things that you can begin to control? Whether that's I'm going to go on a walk every day, or I'm going to tell my boss or my teacher I need help, or whatever that might be. You've got to find some control in your life because you're going to a wrong, terrible place that's killing you and deceiving you to get control.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's what it's interesting because it is very empowering nowadays, and I I was looking up like what other people say about this topic because kind of like what you're saying. I also see that it seems like most sin doesn't just fall into one of these categories of vices. Maybe like specifically like pornography. Yes, it like just gets it's filed under lust, but like you were just saying, like it actually could come from a deeper issue of also anger. It seems like it's usually a combination of all these that are connecting. But speaking of like lust being like like empower or like pornography being empowering and stuff, I saw a quote when I was looking up like what others say about the topic and stuff, and um, C.S. Lewis has a good one. Let's see, it's yeah, lust is a poor, weak, whimpering, whispering thing compared with that richness and energy of desire which will arise when lust has been killed.
Yeah,
And it's yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like we go to that and in the moment, in the time, we feel like this is gonna solve everything. It's gonna help us. It's gonna make us better. But it's just kind of like I don't know. It's an interesting like all we can do is kind of cry for help in those moments. But then we're also afraid to cry for help. We don't want to necessarily tell
yeah,
anybody about it. It's just such an interesting
yeah,
place to be. I think it's a dangerous place to be. And then I've also seen that people say sometimes in the studies where they say I think 50% of men or 50+% of men um, like admit to having engaged in pornography at some point in their life. But I've
yeah,
seen some of the studies say that like they actually can't find a control. Like they can't find like a solid base for any of these studies because a lot of people are like afraid to talk about it, and so
yeah, right,
they actually say 50%, but that's just them being very conservative.
yeah,
And it's probably way more, and unfortunately maybe even up there close to like in the high 90s, if anything.
yeah,
Just with how today's society is, how easily accessible it is, how much people are pushed to say this is actually a good outlet. Maybe it's a good outlet instead of having sex with your girlfriend. You can do this instead, and kind of like anything the enemy can do to get you to engage and get you into this life and into this routine,
yeah.
he'll do to get you there.
I want so so I've heard a similar quote, like something along the lines of like lust is like um, eating hot dogs when like there's a filet mignon that's being prepared for you, something like that.
That's yeah.
And so I like that, but here's kind of my revisionist thought on that. Now on the other side of being Catholic and being swimming in the waters of redemptive suffering and the high call of chastity and the goodness of purity. Um, is what that can tend to do unintentionally is say, hey, and again, like I had the framework of college students, young adults. Hey, I know this is a really challenging season. You're not married yet. You're full of lust. These are you're sufficing for hot dogs. So, but don't worry, get married, and then it will be this filet mignon. And it's like how terribly we're setting them up for marital sex because we're
Mm,
actually then putting all this pressure, and most of the time the woman is the one who feels that pressure in the
yeah.
premarital counseling that I've done, where we're saying, hey, there's you ought to have this really high expectation that sex is going to fulfill all of your desires, and you're no longer going to lust anymore, and you
Hmm.
know, we're doing the thing that we just talked about 10 minutes ago, where you're 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 kind of now bringing the world's expectations of sexuality into marriage,
Hmm.
saying, it's going to be great, and there's a lot of truth in that. Like, yes, it's
Yeah.
great when you are connected with your spouse and um, in all the ways, and your heart is in the right place, and you're giving yourselves to one another, and you want their good, and you're pursuing their good. It's a beautiful gift that God's given to us.
Hmm.
Um, at the same time, what I have come to find, and what I would always say, is like 99.9% of my life, I'm called to the same thing that a 17-year-old single person is called to, and that
Yeah.
is to offer my body as a sacrifice and to live a chaste life and to live self controlled and to pursue virtue and to live in accordance with God's will. And
Hmm.
that's a fight and a challenge, but it's good. And so
Hmm.
I would almost redefine the filet mignon
Hmm.
as um, chastity. There's
Yeah.
so much good in um, being obedient in the hard moments, and there's so much good in overcoming. Like the longer you're chased, the less like the less power that the pull and the temptation has on your heart and your mind, and that is so freeing. Like that's
Yeah.
the freedom that we all want, and that's the filet mignon. It's this life that's it's giving all of yourself at every moment to God,
Yeah.
And we're not going to do it perfectly, but a 17-year-old can do it, and so can I. You
Hmm.
know, a married man with children and whatever. Like I can do that too.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I liked the quote. I get the quote. It
Hmm.
made me think of another quote, and
Yeah.
it made me kind of think about how I've seen that played out in wrong ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. In the chase too also comes like in marriage as well. And I remember we were just talking recently to a couple that we were doing a engaged encounter with, and we were just talking about how I think it was during one of their talks, but we were just talking about how yes, you want to practice chastity now before you're married because this is a gift from God that's given to us to to be able to consummate our love and our marriage like in matrimony. Um, but then even after that, you're going to have times where you're going to have to be chaste within your marriage, whether that's like postpartum, and there's that sometimes 6 to 9 months that you aren't allowed to come
Sure.
together with your wife, and so there's a practice of chastity there as well. And so even if someone's not necessarily engaging in pornography and that hasn't been a struggle for them, like that's something you're going to have to engage or have to practice at some point. But then I also thought about to our last episode of the seven vices, we talked about gluttony, and we just talked about how like there's this um, like how we really need to focus on kind of just having self mastery over our bodies and over our
Yeah.
decisions, because it's like yeah, you can practice it in simple ways of like there's cupcakes at the birthday party you're going to for your kids, and you can practice and like, you know what, I'm not going to engage in that today
Yeah.
because I had donuts this Sunday or whatever, or don't have the drink when you're going to hang out with your friends or something. But there's ways you can kind of die to yourself and to practice this self mastery so that the devil doesn't have as much control over you. And
Yeah.
I used to have that with alcohol. I was not an alcoholic by any means. So anyone that struggled with that, it's not. I'm not saying I can relate with you, but I would have a drink on like a Sunday young adult event, and then Tuesday would be Taco Tuesday. I'd have like margaritas. Then Thursday nights Bible studies, have a beer, and then Saturday's the games, have another beer. It's like, man, I'm having like 4 or 5 drinks a week. Like this is crazy.
Yeah.
But it was because I wanted to say yes to it, and I felt like I couldn't say no to it. And so self mastery is also over here in this, definitely in this vice as well.
Yeah. It's good to learn that you can still have, like, when alcohol and fun become, you know, Siamese twins.
Yeah.
No, you can actually have fun without that.
Yeah.
It's good to train yourself. Yeah, that made me think of 1 Corinthians 6. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Food is meant for the stomach, and stomach the food, and God will destroy both the one and the other. And it goes on to talk about how our bodies are how we belong to God,
Yeah.
and our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. And this idea we belong to God, like how in the face of our society is that verse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if there was one, you know, championing idea of society, is like, I belong to myself. I belong to no one else. No one can tell me what to do. I'm made for nothing more than my own gratification. And no, like Paul's like, no, you actually belong to God,
Yeah.
and God's taken up a residence in your heart,
Mm-hmm.
and so therefore, don't be mastered by your body, but bring it under His submission, like bring it under His control
Yeah.
and His will. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, that's the irony, right? Like
Yeah.
that freedom, slavery looks like freedom, um,
Yeah.
and no, that's going to tangle you and
Yeah.
lead to terrible consequences. And I've got stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's been something that's come up in a lot of these too, is just this. Uh, oh wow, I blanked what I was going to say or when I said that. But anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
just this. Well, the slavery looking like freedom, and freedom looking like slavery, and just that's what I was going to say is belonging to God, and like that being your purpose. And I feel like when you can understand that and you get that, you grasp that aspect of life, it's like I am made in God's image. I am made to worship and serve God and do everything for the glory of God and for His kingdom. Your whole life could change if depending on how things are going now. All of a sudden, everything could change because that self mastery becomes easier because it's easy to sacrifice things and give up things that aren't going to help you grow closer to God, and everything just stays in the right order where it's God, family, then business, work, and entertainment, stuff like that. It just kind of like puts everything in the right order, and you start to put your prayer life as a priority because you know that that's the way you're going to grow closer to God. The more you grow closer to God, and you get into your marriage later, and then you know like, oh, we need to grow closer to God together through prayer, and and you start to understand all this stuff. It just starts to kind of, the dominoes start to fall in place. But it's
Right.
usually, or almost always, it seems like in all these vices we talk about, it's always the disorder of whatever the topic we're talking about,
Yeah.
which I
Yes.
guess is the definition of sin.
Yeah. Yeah. Lust is almost like, could that person belong to me? Like, could I belong to that person?
Mm-hmm.
That's not the definition of it, but it's one way to think about it. And so
Mm-hmm.
the antidote would be this: no, it belonged to God, and let me live according to that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Well, um, as the time's kind of coming to a
sure.
close, do you have any last like words on chastity though? Like any of that before we get into like kind of like the tips and stuff for people?
I do just think it's beautiful that we're talking about this on the solemnity of Saint Joseph.
Oh yeah,
Man, I remember there was
our
one
most
moment I
chaste
had sitting
spouse.
in mass one day, looking at this big statue of Saint Joseph, and in this season of my life, things weren't playing out exactly as I was kind of hoping they would. My expectations were not being met, and
Mm-hmm.
sitting there thinking about Joseph is getting married, and
Mm-hmm.
like as a guy, he's really excited about something,
Mm-hmm.
and then he goes his whole life and never gets that satisfaction met, and he he finds a new purpose, and that is serving the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And the chastity, the control, like not being mastered by anything. I don't know. There's this weird thing. Like I had this hypothetical conversation of like, do you think Joseph and Mary slept in the same bed? I and stayed virgins their whole life. I gosh, that would be so hard. And obviously, we don't know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did they get like changed in front of each other, or did they like go hide in the closet so like they wouldn't be a
Yeah,
temptation to the other person?
yeah.
Um, anyway,
Especially
but
because we
it is,
don't hear much about Joseph at all, really.
yeah,
Especially
right,
once
yeah,
Jesus' ministry starts, we're like, where'd he go?
yeah,
Um,
right, yeah.
yeah,
Which I think,
yeah,
right, is not why people thought that he died an early death, just because he's not
yeah,
mentioned anywhere in the Gospels
yeah, yeah,
after Jesus' ministry begins.
yeah, absolutely. Um, well,
So,
cool. Well,
so takeaways or
yeah,
things to
yeah,
do or consider.
yeah. That's being kind of the last section. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love to always leave it like someone's sitting there listening, and the whole
sure.
time they've been like, yeah, this is me. Like this is what I've been struggling with. Especially you have an experience with people who have probably come into your office before and have said this
Yeah,
exact thing. Like, yes, I'm struggling with this. Well, what are some like steps you've taken them through to like? Obviously, the first step being that is going to a
yeah,
spiritual director, a priest, a friend, someone who you trust, and saying I'm struggling with this. Then what's after that?
yeah, yeah. Man, I have a lot of thoughts here. I'm gonna like a shotgun shoot it all off and see if anything sticks.
Yeah.
Because the answer is like the place I would begin is like you've got to be committed to the long term process
Mm-hmm.
and the humility of repenting yet again and like continuing this desire to work through it. It's going to take you years. If we're particularly talking about like a real addiction, a stronghold of pornography has over your life, like lust will be something that it'll pop up here from time to time, but like this daily, regular, lustful heart and attitude, like you've got to be committed to the long term process of this. I know some people, it sounds like perhaps part of your story is, God does this the burning bush moment where he shows up and
Yeah.
things really quickly change. And I don't want to. God can do anything He wants,
Yeah.
and He can change you in a snap of a finger.
Mm-hmm.
But what we see usually is that it's this long, faithful road in the right direction. As one of my former heroes, Eugene Peterson, used to say, So that'd be the first thing, is like the humility and the perseverance is like the thing required for the journey.
Yeah.
Um,
And
I
can
would
I
say,
touch on that real fast?
yeah, sure,
Yeah, because it was really interesting of like having this overwhelming feeling and just going and making all these really, really hard decisions. It felt like I couldn't even actually control it. It was super strange. It's the only time I've ever experienced that, and I actually don't even know why that would be. And my thoughts have like gone all over the place of like maybe I was that far out of control that the Holy Spirit was finally like, you know what, I'm gonna take over because he's so like I need to like save him kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's what it was. Like that's
sure,
been a thought that I've reflected with, or maybe it was just like a blessing of like. But I don't know if
yeah,
that would be the case either. So this is actually like me being curious of like I don't even know why that was the case, but it was the strangest like literally a guy was doing a talk on his own story of struggling with his son
yeah,
and he said like the word coward a few times, and all of a sudden I was just like, and like felt super light and literally just heard those three things. But even to this day, like people ask me that when I do share, it's like that's beautiful that that happened. Why do you think that happened? Or like what was the experience like? And I never know. Like I never know
yeah,
those answers to that. It's so interesting. So I definitely always tell people like I think it's not something to expect that God's going to do that to you one day, but you're thankful and grateful when it does happen. So it was a
yeah.
very interesting experience.
And again, and it plays into upbringing, relationship with parents, the health in other areas of your life, the level of addiction that it's become.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's lots of different variables I think that can play a role in how one person progresses and against another. But it's important to like not like this is your story and like you're committed to the work that God's doing with you. Continue to cooperate with Him and don't give up. Um, yeah, I so that'd be kind of the first recommendation that I'd have.
Yeah.
The second, I will say that there's like some scientific study that this is like more addictive than any drug. Like if you think of the hardest drug, pornography is like 10 times more addictive than that. And in
Mm-hmm.
science, there's a scientific study that says that it'll take neurologically to pave new pathways that are healthy and godly and holy. It takes 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anyway, again, like it could take 5 days. But anyway, all right. Second thing would be, and we've already talked about this. Like you cannot do it alone. You've got to find a trusted person. If you don't have that person,
Yeah.
pray today that God would open the door for a meaningful relationship in your life,
Yeah.
a face-to-face relationship, and that person has to be someone in addition to your spouse. And maybe my advice also would be like for single people versus married people, there'd be a lot of the differing thoughts or additional thoughts perhaps. But you've got to have people in your life. You cannot do this by yourself. And there's got to be you can't bond over your shame, like I mentioned earlier. You've got to find ways that you're bonding towards
Mm-hmm.
good, positive things that you're bonding, and let like this accountability be a part of what your group meeting is like, or what you talk about with your. But you've got to be friends. Like you've got to have each other's backs.
Yeah.
There's that little parable that Jesus gives about cleaning out the house, and if you don't add anything into the house, like the demons are going to come back with 7 times the power.
Yeah.
And so the third thing, and it should have been the first thing, and it's kind of I really deeply mean this and believe it is the number one most important thing, and the thing you actually want is intimacy with Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
um, that this is our priority. This is what we were made for.
Yeah.
As Augustine said, our heart is restless till it finds its rest in Thee. And so we have to figure out how you like to pray and do that. Don't try to pray like somebody else. Pray in the ways that you enjoy praying, that you can pray today,
Yeah.
and begin these devotions to our Lord,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the intimacy that you really want. If you're single, I'd say there's a level of, well, single or not. There's a level of you have time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, as this is coming from two dads with jobs and parents and
Yeah.
kids, it's like you have so much time right now to pave and build this foundation of intimacy with the Lord. in your own practices and devotions. Like use that time. Like that is a beautiful gift,
Yeah.
particularly college students listening or young adults that are single or maybe newly married without children. Pave a good foundation.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of accountability software. I'm definitely for this season. There's an old saying that a good counselor meeting with an alcoholic, the first thing that alcoholic needs to do is get rid of all the alcohol out of the house.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then we can talk about why you're going to the alcohol. But until you get rid of it, you're not going to make any progress.
Yeah.
There's so much good accountability. I mean, Covenant Eyes being the most familiar one, at least the one I'm familiar with.
Yeah. Me too.
Um, it's not a solution. It is a band-aid. And
Mhm.
to allow God, like to allow your brain to get some rest,
Yeah.
and to allow God to do some digging. Um, but you've got to have it. You've got to have it. And usually, if someone is unwilling to take that step, I hate to be so pessimistic,
Mhm.
pessimistic. They're just not going to see much progress.
Yeah.
If they're too entangled in the addiction of lust, like they're just not going to see much progress,
Yeah.
because they're giving their human flesh, which the Bible speaks very negatively about.
Mhm.
um, the they're giving that flesh way too much credit, that they're
Yeah.
going to be able to resist at the next 11 p.m. I'm tired, and yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so those are a few things, like made for intimacy with Jesus, made for intimacy with other people. Serve. Maybe that's be the last thing I say. I'll make it a clean five
Yeah.
things. It's like serve.
Yeah.
Um, figure if if pornography and lust is the use of the other person for my own good, then the antidote for that is giving of myself for the other person.
Yeah.
And so figure out between you and the Lord what that service looks like, but get outside of yourself,
Yeah.
and see what that does.
Mhm.
Anyway, all right, those
Yeah.
are those are some thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think to tag on to a few of the things you said is that, or one of the things you said at least, um, finding that someone, especially like a friend. Then on top of that, it's honestly finding a priest too, or if you're not Catholic, maybe it's
Yeah,
your pastor or something. But like, um, but finding that like spiritual director that can help you, that you're willing to open up to. I love that the Martins, St. Louis and Zelly Martin, the parents of Therese of Lisieux, I love that they all had the same parish priest who was also their confessor and was also their spiritual director. It was so awesome because it was like that priest just knows them so intimately, and I feel like that's a way you can really grow. Even though I know there's so many people out there that are like, oh, I've got to confess something real bad, if it's pornography or something. Maybe I'll go to this parish at lunch today and
yeah,
do my confession there because I don't want to do that to my priest. And I would honestly encourage the opposite.
me
I
too.
personally try to do, and when I did the my big confession, I went to the priest and there's the chair where you can do anonymously or not, and I purposely made myself sit in front of the priest so they knew it was me, and like I wanted to be as vulnerable as possible. Not saying you have to do that. That was just something
Yeah,
for me. Like I wanted to try to be there and be as vulnerable as possible. But I think that can help a lot too. It's really getting with a priest as well that can walk with you on a monthly basis or whatever it is. But that your friend is going to be someone who can like check in with you on Covenant Eyes and be
yeah,
there
that's right.
and watch out for you. Be that person that be there really really consistently. Priests, especially if you're a parish as big as the ones we go to, um, we understand they want to meet with you weekly. They just their schedules may not allow it with so many parishioners. So that's why it's so important to have that person, that best friend. But
Yeah,
yeah, there's a lot of great advice, and so we'll include any resource we talked about, any books we talked about, like Unwanted, and some of that stuff in the description, so you guys can check that out below. Um, but yeah, but again, Caleb, thanks for joining, and I know we could probably honestly do like a multi-part series on this topic, and so just to let everyone know, our goal is not necessarily to tackle the entirety of the topic; it's to tackle as much as we can in the time we try to stick to. And
yeah,
so,
sure.
yeah, thanks for joining.
It's good talking. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. You guys don't forget like and subscribe, support the channel, join the Patreon, and we will see you guys next week. Have a blessed Lent. And yeah, we'll see you next time.